Good evening, I'm Ricardo Goncalves and welcome to SBS World News. Tonight we're taking a closer look at Scott Morrison's second budget. What surprises were there? Who has done well? Who misses out? SBS Chief Political Correspondent Daniela Ritorto is in Canberra and joins me live. Daniela, what have we learned tonight?
Ricardo, tonight was a real reset budget in Scott Morrison's own words, trying to pitch it at the concerns of everyday Australians. They're making big banks pay more to help us return to surplus. People looking to downsize as well as first home buyers are winners. But if you're jobless on welfare, then there are big changes in store for you. And we're all going to have to pay a little bit more tax for the National Disability Insurance Scheme.
And I call the Treasurer.
Yeah. It's Budget 2.0 for Scott Morrison and the stakes couldn't be higher.
We must choose to tackle cost of living pressures for Australians and their families.
The Turnbull government wants to use this budget to turn around its fortunes after last year's wafer-thin election result. The main aim is to neutralise attacks from the opposition, both during and after the campaign, including on health. The freeze on indexation of the Medicare benefits schedule will be lifted and bulk billing incentives for diagnostic imaging and pathology will be reinstated. But it'll cost the budget more than $2 billion in lost revenue. Another $1 billion will be freed up for new medicines through an agreement to make some drugs cheaper. And all Australians will be paying a higher Medicare levy to fully fund the National Disability Insurance Scheme.
This is all of our responsibility.
As promised for months, housing affordability is another big ticket item. First home buyers will be able to save for a deposit by salary sacrificing up to $30,000 into their superannuation. When they take the money out, it'll also be taxed at a lower rate. And older Australians looking to downsize will be allowed to contribute up to $300,000 into their superannuation from the sale of their family home. To increase supply, the government will open up Commonwealth land for housing and states will need to meet their own targets. To attract investors to affordable housing, there'll be larger capital gains tax discounts and the ability to receive rent as a direct debit from the tenants' welfare payments. Despite steering clear of changes to negative gearing, investors will no longer be able to claim travel expenses to visit their properties from the 1st of July. In terms of budget repair, the Treasurer's aiming his fire at the top end of town. The country's 5 largest banks will be hit with a levy, netting a huge $6 billion over 4 years.
They're in a position, I think, to support budget repair. I think this is frankly, a modest measure for the banks.
The deficit will be almost $30 billion, slightly deeper than expected. That decline's set to continue in the short term, but the government's banking on a larger than predicted return to surplus within 4 years. The Treasurer's spruiking his vision of better days ahead, but they will be worse for some. A new trial will require 5,000 dole recipients to pass drug testing for their payments. If they don't, they risk being referred to a doctor for substance abuse treatment and placed on the cashless welfare card. There'll also be a new 3 strikes and you're out rule for not showing up to appointments, with escalating penalties that culminate in the loss of payments for a month. Job seekers will also be forced to spend up to 20 extra hours a fortnight looking for work.
If you want to save money on the welfare budget, the best way to do it is make sure people get jobs and get them off welfare and into work.
After major changes to 457 visas for migrants in the past few weeks, there's now more to come. A new levy of up to $5,000 for businesses that employ foreign workers will net the government more than $1 billion. And from the 1st of July, migrants will need to have 15 years continuous residency instead of 10 before they're eligible for the pension, unless they pass a working and welfare dependency test. It'll save the government more than $100 million. This budget has all the hallmarks of an apology to help right the wrongs of nasty coalition budgets in years gone by. The so-called zombie savings measures from 2014 and 2015 are all gone. $13 billion worth.
Australian people don't give you a leave pass because you can't get things or have had difficulties in the Senate.
We'll support sensible things where we can. Of course we will. Where we see something that's good, we'll give it our full support, even if it's not quite done in the way we would.
The next test is getting these new measures through Parliament to make Budget 2017 a reality. Marija, Jovanovic, SBS World News.
Well, as always, there are winners and losers, although the government has tried hard not to annoy too many people, all part of this reset. Let's hear first from a couple of observers who are pretty happy.
Well, I think the housing measures are good in parts. I think in particular the budget measures directed at improving affordable rental housing for people on low incomes are good measures. The bond aggregator that will allow not-for-profit housing providers to borrow more at lower interest rates, the pressure that's being put on the states to deliver more by way of affordable rental housing.
What we'll see is the neediest patients have bulk billing incentives restored soon. In 12 months' time, rebates indexed for patients seeing GPs and all specialists, with another 12-month delay until specialist consultations are indexed.
Less impressed, welfare agencies and the banks. Let's hear from them.
In this budget tonight, we've got the government saying it plans to trial drug testing if you're on social security, if you're trying to get the disability support pension, if you are, your disability is related to drugs or alcohol, then you may not get that pension. We've got harsh waiting periods. If you're a migrant and you haven't been in Australia for at least 10 years, having to wait longer for the pension. We've got a demerit system now for people.
We've heard about the levy on the banks. We need to be careful. We need to be very careful how this is approached. How structuring business and taxes directly to one particular part of business, and we've seen this in the past with the mining tax, can actually be fraught with danger.
Well, after his speech, I caught up with the Treasurer, Scott Morrison, and I asked him whether people should be worried about the banks probably trying, perhaps, to pass on this tax to their customers.
I don't think we should be, because this is a levy which is very similar to similar positions that have been done in other countries. The UK has a different version of this, but it's basically a similar type of an impost. I mean, what this isn't a tax on people's deposit accounts like the Labor tax was. It's not a tax on people's mortgages or things like this. It is based only on the top 5 banks. It's capped only for those above $100 billion in liabilities. And the ACCC has been given the task and funded to ensure that banks are not misrepresenting. You're right, banks put up prices on people every day. They're not terribly happy about that, but they won't be able to misrepresent what they're doing. I mean, this is not a tax on people's deposit accounts. It's not a tax on their mortgages. And so why they would actually tax them or charge them more as a result, well, that would be very deceptive, and I don't think that would show good faith to their customers.
Talk me through the thinking behind this Medicare Guarantee Fund. Isn't it just a separate account? You could still cut from it if you wanted to. Are you that spooked really still by Labor's Medicare campaign?
Well, first of all, we're unfreezing the freeze on the Medicare payments, which Labor put in place, and we're unfreezing that tonight. We're also doing similar things with the diagnostic imaging and other things of that nature. We're investing more in the pharmaceutical benefits, $1.2 billion on those arrangements, $10 billion all up on investments in healthcare, including important investments in mental health. The Medicare Guarantee Bill is to assure Australians. I mean, we need to reassure them. Labor ran some lies at the last election, fairly blatantly and openly, and we need to reassure Australians that Medicare is something we're committed to, we're funding it, we're being transparent about it. And you know, the real difference between a Labor and Liberal budget is our budget's always paid for. They just make empty promises.
Okay, let's move on now to this welfare crackdown. It doesn't really save much in terms of the budget bottom line. This drug testing, even Tony Abbott thought about it and dumped it. Is this more about being punitive?
No, it's not. If people can't get into work because they've got issues with drug and alcohol abuse, and we just can't look the other way on that. I mean, the best way to get your welfare budget under control, I used to be the Social Services Minister. I got a pretty good appreciation of the size of that bill. 8 out of 10 taxpayers go to work every day to pay for it. Now, it's got to be fair to taxpayers as well. But what this does is, it's a trial. There's only 5,000 people affected in a couple of locations yet to be selected. We're going to see if this will actually help, whether it will work. And if people are pinged on one occasion, then they can be referred to treatment. But if there is no response, if you can just not turn up to job interviews, not do your mutual obligation requirements, not meet with your job service provider, not take a job that's been offered to you which is reasonable work, and your excuse is, well, I was too drunk or drugged, that's not fair to taxpayers, and it's actually not fair to them either. We should actually step in, and that's what this does.
There's a real Australia First theme, I'd suggest, to this budget. Some of these measures, the levy on temporary foreign workers, banning foreigners from buying up more than 50% of developments, a tax on empty properties held by foreigners, making migrants wait years longer for the pension. Don't you risk sending a real, people aren't welcome to Australia message with this?
Not at all. I think immigration has been one of the cornerstones of Australia's economic success over generations. I mean, we talked tonight about Snowy 2.0. What better example is there than that project, which we want to invest more in the announcements we've made tonight? I mean, that project was as magnificent in its engineering achievements as was it the diversity of the workforce that built it. And so I'm pro getting people to take that work and to come to Australia where they have the skills and they come to make a contribution, not take one. That's the best thing about Australian immigration. So I'm a big fan. But we also need to be training Australians, which are not just, they're Australians who were born here, and about half of Australians have at least one parent who was born overseas. They're all Australians. We're all Australians, and we want to see our own children trained up to take those jobs, and that means we've got to invest in that, in the skills and the training and the education that's there. And we used to have a scheme where you would pay 1% of your payroll internally in your own company for training, or 2% into an industry fund. Now, frankly, that compliance just wasn't working. We have no real idea about how many people were really doing that. They should have been doing it, and I'm quite sure some employers were. So we're going to get rid of that scheme, and we're going to say you'd pay a simple levy on each and every foreign worker for the time they're there on a temporary visa, and if it's a permanent one, you pay a one-off levy. That goes into a Skilling Australians fund, which supports every Australian, whatever your background is, wherever you've come from, so you can get the skills you need to have a successful future in Australia.
Treasurer, thank you.
Thanks a lot.
So, Daniela, how are you seeing the budget? Is it going to be a difficult one to sell?
Well, Ricardo, I think if we look at it in terms of probable passage through the Senate, Labor will pass the bank tax. They said they will. They hardly couldn't, given all the bank bashing that Labor's been engaging in over the last few years. But it is reserving its judgment on the NDIS. Scott Morrison today in the lockup was making a real emotional appeal that, yes, this is a budget that's actually making Australians all pay more tax for the NDIS. But he's saying that he's pulling on the heartstrings a bit here. He's saying that everyone, family, society is affected by disabilities, so how can we not? It is our responsibility to make sure that this thing is fully funded. Those welfare measures, though, especially that drug trial, I think will struggle through the Senate. But if we have a look at it politically, Ricardo, I think they've been very clever here in terms of the politics. Think about everything that Labor has kind of bashed the government on over the last few years. If we think about health, schools, housing affordability, the banks, they've come up with an answer for just about all of those in tonight's budget. Labor will argue, perhaps rightly so, that they're the wrong answers, but I think this budget at least puts a coalition, Malcolm Turnbull, back in the game.
Okay, big day. Daniela Ritorto in Canberra, thank you. Well, we have more review of the budget shortly, including what it means for small business. While in other news, live to Seoul, where exit polls have predicted South Korea's new president.